We'd be going over that particular passage a little bit more. I'm sorry, Exodus 37. I don't know why I said 35. That's where it starts. But Exodus 37, it said, he made an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide. Then he forged the 2 cherubim of gold from hammered work at the 2 ends of the atonement cover. 1 cherub at the one end and 1 cherub at the other. He made the atonement cover from a single piece with the cherubim on the 2 ends. And of course, where's one place that I know y'all know this? Where does this image also show up in the gospel accounts? What's that? I thought somebody said it.
What was the question again?
Where does the image of the 2 angels? At the tomb. Right. I thought I heard somebody say it there at first. When Peter and John, they run to the tomb because they had heard that it was empty. They show up there and there's the 2 angels sitting on either end of the position of the placement where his body was. Of course, his body is the means of atonement, wasn't it? So that's where we see that kind of image. But it says, so the cherubim spread out their wings on high, overshadowing the atonement cover with their wings, with their faces to one another, and the faces of the cherubim toward the atonement cover. So where are they looking? Where are they focusing their attention on? On the atonement cover. When you look at that, the atonement there is the kaporeth. It's where we get the word for Kippur, for Yom Kippur, the day of atonement, singular, but really it's Kippurim, which is atonements. It's that basis of that word. And when you look at the word, one of the things that's interesting about it, when you break down those letters and the meanings, the kaf, the first letter here, is a palm or an open hand, to cover, to open, or to allow. The pei is a mouth, to speak, a word or to open. Again, that has that same kind of idea. The reish is a head, a person, or the highest, the head or authority, that type of thing. And then the tav is a sign or to seal in the covenant. And so I was thinking about how that kind of goes together, but in the sense of being it's atonements. But you think of like a hand that covers, a mouth that speaks, on or over the head, creating or making the sign, making the covenant. It's kind of how the word breaks down. So even within the word itself, atonement is the means by which the covenant is made, isn't it? Without the atonement, we couldn't really have the covenant at all, because our sin would still be getting in the way.
You could even say to open the mouth, the highest covenant.
Yeah.
The highest sign.
But what made me think about this was when you go into the actual ceremony of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, this is also played out there at the Day of Atonement. Look at Leviticus 16. It says, when he had finished atoning for the holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, then he is to present the live goat, right? There he has the 2 goats there. This is the one that he has, the living goat, the one that wasn't sacrificed. It says, Aaron should lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat. What was the first letter? Kaf, which is a palm or open hand. On the head of on the what? The head of the live goat, and then do what? And then you speak. So you've got the hand on the head, and then you're supposed to confess, and you confess with your mouth, right? Over it all the iniquities of Bnei Israel and all their transgressions and all their sins. He should place them on the head of the goat and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in readiness. The goat will carry all their iniquities by itself into a solitary land, and he is to leave the goat in the wilderness. This one's a little challenging because what's the last thing that's missing is what? The tav, right? The tav is the sign or the covenant, right? But when you look at tav, that's the modern Hebrew there, but the ancient or the more paleo looks like what? It looks like a cross, right? So where do you think in that passage this one is played out?
Is that cross?
Well, the cross
The sacrifice.
is carried.
Carry all their iniquities.
He carries and bears our iniquities. That's at least one way that y'all might think of something different, but to me that really played out the letters of the word atonement right there, from the hand, the head, the confession, and the carrying, which establishes what? He bears the cross, he carries our sins, and that is the sign of the covenant in a lot of ways. To me, that I was working on that last night, and I was like, that's pretty neat. I like that. But you just see these things get played out there. And of course, when you take a look at the picture of the cover, this is one of the more traditional ways that you see it. They're kneeling there, their wings are outstretched. That's almost horizontal. But when we read it before, it talked about they're supposed to be spreading out their wings on high, right? So some of the other ones will picture it more like that, where their wings more vertical or outstretched and then coming over like that. But these wings, what do they look like? What do they form when they're coming together like this? They're covering, right? The atonement cover, right? It almost it reminded me almost of a type of chuppah, where there's that covering over that, where they're coming underneath the wings of these things. And what happens under a chuppah? What happens? Marriage, a covenant, right? And so what happens for us at this atonement cover? It's an interesting question, right? Yeah. You think of, atonement being made, right? The hand of God works and covers. He puts the hand of God works and covers. Well, atonement is made. I'm missing this slide. Mercy is bestowed. Salvation is secured, right? I'm back up here just a little bit. So the hand of God works and covers. He places us like the hand is placed on the substitute for us. That's part of the ceremony. And it's when someone places their hand on the head of a person today, or in the Jewish culture, when one person places the hand on the head of another, what are they doing in that? Blessing, right? A pronouncement is made. When you think about us at the atonement cover, when we come to Messiah, what are we supposed to do? We confess with our mouth that Yeshua is Lord, and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, right? And then what does God do in return? Are we not declared righteous? Yeah, we are justified. But it's a pronouncement also, again, with the mouth, right? And it's placed on the head or on the Messiah, on the sinless substitute. The burden of sin was placed. But upon us, again, receiving a blessing, we receive pardon. And what was laid on him, the iniquity of us all, we receive the blessing that comes from all of that. The burden of our sin and our guilt is carried away. And the covenant is established. And the eyes of the cherubim, the angels and such, are focused on the atonement cover, where atonement is made, where mercy is bestowed, where salvation is secured. Their eyes are focused on the atonement cover. Right? That's where it talks about. And so when they're looking at this, the cherubim, they spread out their wings. They overshadow the atonement cover because they're focusing on, they're covering over and focusing on what's happening right there at that place. Their faces to one another, their faces of the cherubim toward the atonement cover. Their eyes are fixed on the place and even on the moment of what is salvation, isn't it? Isn't this picturing, representing where our salvation is taking place? So all is pointing toward that kind of moment. And, you know, this typically portrayed with the angels, as we saw earlier, they're portrayed typically kneeling or bowing, right? With the wings outstretched over them. So they're in a bowing position, a kneeling position. Their heads are bowed in reverence to the presence of God. That's how they're typically presented here on that. Y'all saw those pictures earlier, which made me think about a connection in the New Testament on this very thing. Look over in 1 Peter chapter 1. First Peter chapter 1, starting at verse 8. He says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you don't see him now, you trust him and are filled with a joy that is glorious beyond words. Right? Receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. You know, he says, though you have not seen him, you love him. We are supposed to do what? We walk by and not by sight. Right? We've not seen him. He's writing this to a people who were not there in Judea when all of these things were happening with Yeshua. When he was walking around, when he was teaching, when he was arrested, when he was crucified, when he was resurrected. So they had not seen him. And yet, in spite of the fact they hadn't seen him, do they still love him? Yes. Are we in any different situation? Were we there? Did we see it? Or did we depend upon somebody telling us? See, even without seeing, we believe. And we love him. We believe in the message that has been passed down for generations in testimony from person to person, but also within the scriptures. And so even without seeing, even though you don't see him now, can we still trust him?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Can we still, in spite of all of this, have a joy that passes understanding? Yes, we can. I should hope so. We should. Right? He says, even though you don't see him now, you trust him and are filled with a joy that is glorious beyond words. Because it doesn't always make sense to have joy, does it? It doesn't always make sense because things are difficult, things are hard. We weren't there. We can't say with absolute certainty. You know, we are ultimately like the Missourians and such, where the show me people. We prefer to see it for ourselves and not rely on what somebody else says or what somebody else has told us. We prefer to be that. But here we are in this moment, in this time, because this allows us, being able to trust in him even though we don't see him and be filled with joy even in the midst of this, we can make sense of an existence that is often marked by sorrow and suffering. Right? Isn't that what they were experiencing in Peter? It's written to people who were experiencing persecution. And we can have that joy even in the midst of our sorrow and suffering because we have confidence in what we are receiving. It's the one thing that we can't earn. It's the one thing we can't pay for or otherwise obtain on our own. Okay. It's the one thing that we cannot earn on our own, the outcome of the whole point of our faith, which is what? Salvation of our souls. Okay? It would be a complete waste of time for us to believe and have faith in God if this was not the outcome, right? If we didn't benefit, if we didn't receive salvation, if He didn't offer that, then what would we be doing it for? We'd still be in the exact same situation we were before, dying and living apart from Him in eternal separation from Him. Yes. Yeah, we don't have a place to go and see His body. That's very true. We don't have to see the coffin come with the flag draped over it and to carry on that imagery. But we don't see Him now, but we can still make sense of our struggle with the joy that we have in our trust, because we can have assurance, we can have confidence in the fact that we are receiving the salvation of our souls. He goes on to say, the prophets who spoke about the grace that was to be yours searched for this salvation and investigated carefully. They were trying to find out the time and the circumstances the Ruach of Messiah within them was indicating when predicting the sufferings in store for Messiah and the glories to follow. Now, this is an amazing passage. So, because we are living in essentially the legacy of the prophets, because what did they speak about? They spoke about grace that was for who? Was it even for them? I mean, it wasn't going to take place necessarily in their day, right? They had to search for it and investigate for it carefully, right? Where were they searching? Where were they investigating?
The Tanakh.
In the Torah, right? In the scriptures, the other writings of the prophets, other things like that. They spoke about the grace. We believe in the grace that they spoke about. And that's, yes, the prophets in the Old Testament spoke about grace. Most of y'all know that, right? The prophets spoke about grace. That may not be a shock for some of us here, but don't you think that would be a shock for most of the Christian world? That the prophets spoke about the grace of God. Because how do we typically communicate the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Grace in the New Testament.
Yeah, it's grace in the New Testament, and the Old Testament is all about the law, right? As if those things are in conflict with one another, as if they don't belong together, as if God in the Old Testament is the law and judgment, and He's the mean guy, but the guy in the New Testament, he's the good parent. When Dad says no, we can always go and ask Mom because she always says yes, right? That's how we often treat the theology between the Old and the New Testament. And is that accurate? Not at all. That's not accurate at all. The Old Testaments were the prophets in the Old Testament, they spoke about grace. And it was grace that was meant for us who weren't even there when it happened. You look at the word grace, it's chen there in Hebrew. It talks about favor, grace, or acceptance. It was first used in reference to Noah, that he found favor, he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It was also used of Abraham in Genesis 18. So they were searching in the Scriptures for grace and salvation. And those can be found throughout the Old Testament. Grace can be found throughout that. You know, the testimony of Scripture is, of course, one of the most powerful testimonies about who? About Yeshua himself, right? If you believe Moses, John says in John chapter 5, you would believe who?
Me.
You would believe me. You would believe Yeshua because Moses wrote about Yeshua. Those were his words. So the testimony of the Scriptures of who Messiah is, could they identify Messiah at all if they didn't have the Scriptures? No. The Scriptures gave them the parameters to look for. This is the Messiah. This is who he will be. This is the family that he will come from. This is the place that he'll be born. This is what he is going to do. This is what he is going to accomplish. And if he doesn't meet these things, then is he the Messiah? No. Are there a lot of people who claim to be the Messiah? Yeah. There's a lot of people that have claimed it over the years. There's a dozen or so people that are claiming it today. But guess what? They're not from the tribe of Judah. They weren't born in Bethlehem. Right?
They'll die and be buried.
They'll die and be buried. And all the other kinds of things that go on. So the Scriptures, where the prophets were searching, they found the testimony of grace. And many early believers were led to Messiah. Did they have the Gospels to read? Right. They did not. They were led to Messiah not because they had the Gospels to read, not because they had Paul's letters to study, but because they could show them Yeshua in detail in the Old Testament. The only Scriptures that they had. And the prophets were searching for this grace. What was Messiah going to do? What was Messiah going to accomplish? It's all in there. It may take some work to find it. It may take some work to look for it, but it's in there. You can lead people to Messiah with the Old Testament because grace is all over it. Yes?
I was just going to say, when I got baptized at South Sidney Baptist, Brother Knapp was amazing. He said, he gave us all a book called How to Be Holy Without Being Religious. And he said, I want you all to remember this one story in the Bible. There was a star. The wise men had been trained to find that star. But they didn't worship the star. They didn't get stuck on the star. They went to find who the star was about. And he said the Torah, the prophets, the writing, it's like a telescope. Don't get stuck on the telescope because it's pointing to the one it's written about. Don't get stuck on a thing you can do, a way you can worship. Keep seeking your Lord. And I've always kept that because it's so easy to get off in the human realm of this day, that day, this food, that food. If it's not about the Lord, then we're getting off in traditions of men. We're getting off in causes. Stop all that divisive stuff. Seek the one that the star was pointing to. Seek the one the Torah was pointing to. And we keep missing the Messiah for the messes we can get in.
Absolutely.
And then we just create all this crap that we have to repent for and get back on the road of seeking Him. And I have never forgot that, Pastor, and it's come back to me many times because I have a tendency to be religious. I have a tendency to want to be doing the right thing, worshiping the right way, looking at the proper stuff. But if I'm not seeking Him wholeheartedly like David did, I'm missing the whole point of showing up to Him.
And it's not like those things are not important.
Right.
But-
But you don't get stuck on it.
Right. You can get lost in those things and lose
The
Messiah.
minutia of the mess.
Which,
Don't
Which,
major in the minors.
as we look to Messiah, is he going to show us these things? Yes, absolutely. Is he going to change the way we live? He's going to change the way we worship? Yes, absolutely. But we still need to have our eyes fixed on him, because that's the thing. We are really no different in our situation. You know, it says at the beginning of that passage, though you have not seen him, right? You love him, right? Who were the Old Testament prophets looking to? Did they see him? Were they present in witnessing all these things? No. They had to search. They had to search diligently. They had to study the scriptures to see him at all. They were in exactly the same situation that we are. And they had the exact same resource that we do. They were not, most of the the Old Testament was finished and written long before Messiah arrived. So they didn't see it in their day. But did they love him? Yes. Because they could see in the scriptures, they could see and look forward to what the Father was going to do in Messiah. So we are in the same kind of situation that the prophets were in. We also have to study diligently into the scriptures to see what he was doing. They were searching, and they were searching. It gave themselves comfort, it gave themselves joy to go through the trials and the tribulations that they had. But in a lot of ways, they were searching. It says that it was revealed to them that they were providing these messages not to themselves, but did it help them? Did the message of the grace of God, what God was going to do, his promises and all those things, did it help them?
Never.
Sure it did. But it was written down and preserved not for their generation, not for their sake, but for ours. It was not for themselves, but to you. And these messages, this is the great thing, the messages has been announced. The message have now been announced to you through those who proclaimed the good news to you by the Ruach HaKodesh sent from heaven. See, they were searching without seeing with their own eyes the salvation that belonged to people that were going to read what they wrote in the future. And they could finally see what had been there all along. See, the message of grace and salvation is found in the scriptures in the Old Testament. It was meant to be told and believed by all those in Peter's day, but not even everybody in the prophet's own day saw it all, or heard it all, or understood it all. Now Peter and the other apostles are taking the messages of the prophets that they had searched, that the Spirit had spoken to them. They have been announcing that message to their day, to their generation. The fulfillment and the full explanation of the salvation that was meant to be revealed at the proper time. And of course that's what we depend on too, don't we? Don't we depend upon people still going out? Don't people's salvations, isn't it still dependent upon the message being announced and proclaimed to those who haven't heard it? The message is the good news of Messiah, the salvation that is there. The prophets, the apostles, and even we are not the only ones paying attention and seeking to understand what's going on. That's one of the neat things about this whole thing. See, we should be studying the scriptures. We should be prepared to explain and pronounce and demonstrate what the good news is. But, we're not the only ones that are interested in this subject. Because, again, what are we receiving in all of this? What is the outcome or the goal of our faith in all of this? The salvation of our souls. And where does that take place? Where were we talking about earlier? At the Atonement cover, right? That's where that picture is from the Old Testament. And when you look at the atonement cover, the faces of the angels was facing where? At the atonement cover. What happens here? Even the angels long to catch a glimpse or long to look into these things. Where are they looking? They're looking at our salvation. They're looking in that moment. They long to look into these things. This is exactly what the cherubim are doing on top of the ark. They are looking into that salvation. You know, that idea, that picture, the parakipto, they're to stoop to look to a thing in order to look at it. To look at it with head bowed. How are the angels portrayed? Are they not bowing? And are they not, their head is focused toward it, to look into with the body that is bent? To look carefully into, to inspect curiously, to bend beside or lean over. That passage there, even angels long to look into these things, is supposed to, or in the mind of a Jewish person, I believe, is supposed to give them this picture of the atonement cover, of what the ark is representing in that picture. Because what does he say in James for us? The one who looks intently, it's the same word, into the perfect Torah, the Torah that gives freedom and continues in it, not becoming a hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he shall be blessed in what he does. That's the same word there. But what is it that they long to look into? They long to look into, even the angels long to look into, to make sense of, to understand the idea of the grace and salvation that we have received in Messiah. They long to understand and make sense of the miracle that the Father has accomplished in the offering of the Son on the cross. You know, when they are looking at this salvation, they are longing to get a glimpse of, they are stooping to or bowing before the mercy seat, the atonement cover. They are bowing to look at the place of our salvation. They are looking at and bowing before that moment. Because why would that interest them so much? Why would that interest them? Why would salvation be such an issue that draws their attention at all?
Well, in Revelation, even the angels are wanting it all to be over.
Well, there's
Kingdom
that.
to be restored.
But is salvation like this available to them?
No.
No. They were created to serve, as Hebrews talks about, those who would receive salvation. There are fallen angels that have become the demonic. Is there a means or mechanism or process of redeeming them? Not that we've been revealed, because there is a place that is prepared for the devil and his angels, right? So, to their knowledge, there is no way for them to be redeemed. But there is a way for us to be redeemed. We have something that available to us that is not available to them. And it's a marvel in that. They are looking into this. They are stooping over to bow before it, to look at the place of atonement, the place of our salvation. They are looking and bowing before who? Who is our salvation? Yeshua is our salvation. Right? Yeshua means salvation. In bowing and looking at the atonement cover, they are ultimately bowing like they were there at the tomb, where they were there on both ends of where his body had been laying. They are looking at Yeshua and what he has done for us, and for our salvation. If only we would long to look into our salvation with the same kind of devotion and the same kind of intensity, and wonder and marvel. If only we would be like the prophets who searched through the scriptures to find the grace of God that is hidden there in there, to search diligently for that so that the message can be truly proclaimed. If only we would fix our eyes on Yeshua. The author, the initiator and perfecter, the author and perfecter of our faith. He says, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also get rid of every weight and entangling sin. Let us run with endurance the race set before us, focusing on Yeshua. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, he disregarded its shame, and he has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is all a picture of the atonement. May we turn our eyes away from the other things, all these things that are shining, all the things that can draw our attention, all the things that can get our eyes off of Yeshua. Instead, we turn our eyes away from those things to consider attentively, to turn one's mind to Yeshua, the author, the initiator, the perfecter, the finisher of our faith. Because that grace has been there all along. That picture of has been there. He was slain before the foundation of the world. The angels were marveling to look at that thing, all at what was accomplished in our salvation, all the way back there when the ark was made. And so when anybody goes around and says, hey, we found the Ark of the Covenant, and they go there, and if they ever did find something like that, we would make a tourist event out of it practically. We would make the Ark and the object itself the focus, wouldn't we? That's the danger of something like that. We would make that object the focus of our attention and worship, and you would have people lined up to walk past, pay money like they do with all the old relics in the ancient church and such as that. But the angels aren't interested in the box itself. The angels are interested in what happens there. And that is our salvation. So may we be willing to focus our eyes and bow in humility towards the seat of mercy and atonement. May we be willing to confess with our mouths that Yeshua is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, so that we might be saved, that we might have that salvation, so we may have Yeshua. That's what we need most. And so this picture of the angels there on the Ark of the Covenant, it just really hit me about focusing on Yeshua. And even the Ark is meant to focus us on Yeshua, because that's where everything, that's the goal of our faith, the destination of our faith is secured there. Does that make sense? I got through that a lot faster than I was expecting.